Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.
"55 years ago, Arkansas writer Charles Portis wrote one of the definitive books on the American West, True Grit. Little did he know how famous the book would become. Every American knows Rooster Cogburn, the meanest U.S. Marshal. John Wayne made him famous in 1969, and the Coen brothers brought him back with Jeff Bridges in 2010. Let's meet my guest, Doug Farnwald, as we join the St. Joe County Public Library's annual One Book, One Michiana to discuss True Grit and find out why the book still has legs. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be back.
I'm so glad you're here.
What, 8 or 9 of the One Book, One Michianas we've done together?
It is,
I
yes.
think it is.
And you know, why do you think they chose this book? And did you like it? I mean, I was almost amazed and wondering, what? True Grit? How did you react?
I think one of the reasons they chose it is because the Western myth resonates so deeply in American culture, even today. You don't see as many Western movies out there as you used to, maybe in the 60s and 70s, but all of us grew up on that, and we all know John. We grew up with John Wayne.
We did.
Kids are a little bit different today. It's different, but we grew up on that, and so that Western myth is very resonant. And one of the things I've really liked about doing One Book, One Michiana is I've read so many books I would not have picked up otherwise.
Isn't that a great thing about One
Oh,
Book, One Michiana? It really is, and I'm the same way. I never would have read all these short stories of Sherlock Holmes or Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I'm so glad I did.
And that's another one, that's where it's different. Frankenstein, the book was so radically different from the movie. That our knowledge of what Frankenstein is mostly comes from the movie. This, True Grit, was very, very different. The book the movie is taken almost verbatim from the book. All the dialogue that you hear, especially the best lines, are right out of the book.
Yeah, so it's a true literary event today. And let's talk about, we're going to be out in the West there. What are we going to
some chuck wagon food.
All right, and what are you going to do?
I'm going to make red bean pie,
which
is from an 1888 cookbook.
Red
from the Old West.
Bean
and I'm going to start by just mashing the beans, and I can still talk while I do this. It takes a little bit.
And so what else are you going to make today?
Well, then the second segment, we'll be making the corn dodgers that Rooster and Maddie and LaBeef relied on as they were chasing Tom Cheney.
Yes, and they used it for food and for target practice.
As well as target practice. They had rather more than they needed, and so they were free to use some of that for target practice, yes.
Well, and I'm going to be making a full pot stew, it's called, and I've been cooking some stew meat for about 3 hours, and we're going to add some cut up onion, and I have garlic in here already, some celery, and then, lo and behold, this Chuck Wagon recipe book says add 1 can of tomatoes, 1 can of peas, 1 can of green beans, and 1 can of corn. And I thought, Doug, they didn't have cans out there.
They did. They had cans. Even canned food was started to become popular and available really during the Civil War.
Okay, during the Civil War.
Which was not too long before. This was set in the 1870s.
The 1870s,
and,
right.
Civil War ended in 1865. So usually tinned meat was where they first were started, but then they had vegetables as well. And it was just a great way to make food accessible away from the cities, because there was no real refrigeration anywhere outside the largest cities. You still had ice boxes.
Yes.
And ice harvesting was actually a big business back then, even up in Michigan. But
on
the frontier, they would have had none of that.
They had to make things that could subsist for many days. And I'm also going to fry some apples, because they could carry apples for a long time, and I will add a little cinnamon. I'm not adding sugar, just butter. It's going to be very simple. We could take this on a chuck wagon trip, or we could go camping with this meal, and it would be fairly safe, wouldn't it?
Yeah. These were simple all meant to be simple meals with few ingredients and no real technique required, because most of the chuck wagon cooks were not what we would call executive chefs.
That's exactly right.
So they were often former cowboys that for one reason or another couldn't really go on the trail anymore. Maybe they were old, or maybe they had an injury or some health issue.
But they could open a can and heat it up.
Yep.
And make that coffee in the morning.
And so I'm separating some eggs now. This is a can of mashed beans, and we're going to put in 3 egg yolks.
Do you want something for your... Oh, you've got it. You're all set here.
And
Excellent.
in the actual recipe in the book, it says to save the whites and make a meringue, which I found a little
Fussy.
incongruous.
A little fussy for being...
But they didn't want to waste any of the food.
Yeah.
And meringue actually is fairly common, as I was doing some research on this, and was referred to by the cowboys as calf slobbers.
I
on
can
their
picture
pies.
that. I wanted to ask you, why do you think the library chose this book this time? At first I was sort of flabbergasted. I was thinking True Grit, and then I read it 3 times, and the 3rd time I just thought it was hilarious. I read a lot of secondary sources, and to think that we're discussing one of the great American books. Why do you think they chose it?
Well, it goes right into the American psyche of self-reliance and perseverance and independence.
Well, exactly. And that's why I think it is a good example of that style of thinking, or how that evolved from Confederate soldiers after the war. Right. Many of them went out west and became, the Texas Rangers.
And it is interesting when you look at out west, we think of that as sort of a definitive American trope. It was all the outcasts. It was former soldiers, particularly Confederates, and a good quarter of cowboys were African American descent, so former slaves. Another quarter were Hispanic, because Europeans, Mexican and Spanish colonists had lived there for 500 years.
And when we were watching these cowboy movies growing up, you never saw a blend of people that actually lived out there. It was mainly these, these hardy and smart Union soldiers, and then everybody was shooting and killing the Native Americans. I mean, we grew up with a cockeyed view of what was going on.
Well, and that's true with every myth. Every myth from every culture is told from one point of view, and leaves some others out. So you can't look at this as history. You can look at it as psychology, and then you can ask yourself, why is it that this resonates so strongly with so many Americans?
And well, I think you're right. The myth of the lone man and the survivors out west. I'm adding the corn and the tomatoes and the green beans, and this will feed 10, 15 cowboys. So let's talk about the characters in this plot. We just have a few minutes before we go to our second segment, but let's talk about the characters. We all know Rooster. He is the meanest marshal that Maddie could find. And who is Maddie? Maddie
is a young girl, 14-year-old, from Yell County, Arkansas, near Dardanelle, as she points out repeatedly. I guess somehow assuming that people are going to know where that is or care.
Dardanelle, yes.
Fort Smith, Arkansas, is the big city, so that's where she goes to find Rooster. And it's interesting that this is considered a Western, but we don't really think of Arkansas today as the West.
No, I never thought of it as that, but it is considered.
It is and was. And where they go is now what is Oklahoma. At that time it was Indian territory, but it is Oklahoma. That's the state. And that's why they had to get a U.S. Marshal, because no one else had jurisdiction except a federal officer.
And of course, she does kind of go and visit some of these men, sort of interviews them, and she hears that Rooster is probably the meanest, the toughest.
Yep, not the best tracker, doesn't always bring them back alive, but he always gets them.
He gets them, and she said, he's the one for me. She's 14, it's almost like she's going to interview all these characters. And let's talk about the story. She is She lives with her family. She's very smart. She does the books for the family.
And she kind of clearly is sort of the, the brains of the operation right from the very beginning.
She is smart. And, you know, we're going to talk more about her and the rest of the characters and why she is getting this marshal in just a few minutes. But in the meantime, let's take a picture. Let's show a picture of John Wayne, the original Rooster, and then Jeff Bridges, the second Rooster, and see what you think. And we'll be right back. Doug Farmwald and I are back discussing True Grit by Charles Portis, and you're going to get ready
I'm going to make the Corn Dodgers.
Corn Dodgers.
Which are essentially a baked hush puppy.
All right.
Again, it's very, very simple. 2 cups of cornmeal, 2 cups of milk, 2 tablespoons of butter, and a tablespoon of sugar.
Okay, while you're doing that, I'm going to be frying some eggs. And you're adding salt.
Just a bit.
All right.
And we're just going to stir this around till it comes to a boil.
So you're going to stir as we talk.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's talk about the plot. We've got to get to the plot, don't we? What is Maddie up to?
Well,
This 14-year-old girl.
Tom Cheney, one of the hired hands on their ranch, went into Fort Smith, the local big city, with her father, and in sort of a drunken rage, shot him, killed him.
Yes.
And then lit out for Indian territory so that the local sheriffs couldn't arrest him.
The Choctaw Nation area, I think.
Right, in what's now Oklahoma. At the time, it was called Indian Territory.
And so she needs to find out
So she needs to
where
find
he is.
where he is, and she needs someone who has federal authority, federal jurisdiction, to be able to bring him in. Because state, city, county don't have the authority to arrest anyone in Indian territory. Only a federal officer. So she needs a U.S. Marshal.
And she knows this. She's very bright. And so as we talked before, she kind of interviews and looks at some of these men, and she chooses this mean, ornery Rooster, Cogburn.
The one with the most grit.
Yes. Oh, grit. She says, I want someone with grit.
Right.
What is grit in this book?
It's basic toughness, I think.
Yes.
You know, and determination and persistence.
And can carry through with it and get it done. And that's why she chooses Rooster Cogburn. And so we find that they don't want her to come along. And
Right.
we meet LaBeef,
As he pronounces it. Yeah.
and he wants to go too because he's after these
The same guy
characters.
for a different crime.
Yes, for shooting a senator.
And it's a state senator in Texas. He's a Texas Ranger. And what's interesting is both of them are really doing it for the reward.
Yes,
And at one point they even negotiate, okay, if we bring him in, if we hang him in Arkansas, how much do we get? If we hang him in Texas, how much do we get? And how do we split it?
Yes, this is the whole purpose of it, isn't it? This is the purpose, but Maddie is there for revenge.
For personal, yeah.
It's personal for her. She is very strict. She's very pious. She's a woman of few words, but they are exactly tough, straightforward. She wants the toughest, meanest guy with true grit.
And everything is going to be done her way.
Yeah.
And when I was reading this, it just struck me, this is like your what we call Karens these days at Starbucks, and this whole book is one long complaint to the manager. Because I want it done this way, and I want it done now, and I don't like your drinking, and I don't like you coming along, and I'm not waiting here, I'm going with you, whatever you say. And it's like, oh,
Yes,
she's exhausting.
but she moves them, and
Yes.
they finally take her on. They try to evade her. They try to dump
They
her.
outrun her.
And she's
Yeah.
still there, and she kind of embodies this tough woman of the West.
And LaBeef finally says, you know what, she earned her spurs.
Yes.
You know, she can come along.
And LaBeef talk about that. He wears these fancy spurs, and he's got this huge old-fashioned gun, and he kind of makes a lot of racket when he walks.
Right.
And so you picture all this going on, and you've got Cogburn, this one-eyed fat man,
Yep.
and he sets the What is it you said he said about I can shoot you, I can kill you right now,
Well, it's one of some of the best lines in the film come straight out of the book.
Yes.
And at the end, when he finally corners, Tom Chaney is captured, and he's going to capture Ned Pepper for another robbery. There's 4 bandits on one side and Rooster on the other, and this, the bandits basically, well, what are you going to do? There's 4 of us. And he goes, well, I mean to kill you in 1 minute, Ned Pepper, or we're going to take you to Fort Smith, where Judge Parker can hang you at his convenience. What'll you have?
And of course, Ned Pepper also takes the line after.
And that's the response.
And then Ned Pepper says, "I call that bold talk for a one-eyed fat man." He's talking to about Rooster.
And that sets Rooster off and starts the climactic gunfight at the end.
Yes, and so these characters, they are just overwhelming. And as I told Doug, the first 2 times I read the book, I didn't see the humor. I think I was trying to do too many things at one time. And this last weekend, I read it straight through, and I found the humor. Took me a while, but that's the case right there. We're down to business. We're going to get our money. What do you do? What are you going to do about it? And there's a horrible fight there at the end, isn't there?
It's interesting when you go into the character of Rooster. At one point, they're just kind of hanging out on the trail in the evening, and Maddie's asking him about his past. Well, his past is pretty criminal.
Yeah.
He robbed an Army paymaster. He was a Confederate soldier in the war. After the war, he robbed a federal payroll. He robbed a bank in New Mexico.
And what does he say? He wants to get to know the characters, these people that he is chasing. He wants to know how they think. But he's done it. He's done it all.
He's done it.
Yeah.
So, the only reason that he's a marshal is because he's actually one of the few guys meaner than these people he's trying to pick up.
So picture prim, prissy Maddie. The sort of, how would you call the beef? He's sort of like a dandy out there.
Well, and he fits the stereotype of what a lot of people would have of Texans.
Yes, a Texas Ranger. And then you've got all these characters in between, but it's a trio. And then you have side people that come in, supporting actors, but the 3 are just amazing. Tom Chaney is really an awful man, the one they're after.
And he goes from being a bully to being a whiner, and even Maddie remarks on that. So you're just a crybaby.
And
he keeps saying, "Oh, everything's against me, and now I'm shot by a child, and now this, and now that's." You started it, buddy. This is your deal.
So that's the kind of thing that I was catching this. Of course, we also have the eye for an eye sort of feeling in this story too. The Old Testament coming.
Yep.
If you killed my father, I'm going to kill you. And then I think as we've maybe we've progressed. I don't know if we have, but somebody said eye for an eye leaves a lot of blind people in the world. So, but in any case, you picture these characters and see that movie again. Either one of them. Read the book. I just think it's amazing.
Now, and what I've done here, I've boiled this down till it's pretty much just a dough.
Oh yeah, it is.
Put in a teaspoon of baking powder. I'm just going to let that cool a little bit so it's comfortable to work with, and we'll form that into the corn dodgers.
Yeah, you could burn out. You could burn out there in the desert. There, you've got to wait till it cools.
Yeah, wait till it cools down a little bit. So
yeah,
a couple of minutes.
Okay, good. We have a couple of minutes. So, and then we talk about the unflinching character. Everybody's unflinching, aren't they? Everybody's drawing a line in the sand.
That is true, and I think that's part of that is it was tough on the frontier. Whether you're a homesteader, whether you're a cowboy, whatever you're doing out there, it was hard work. Digging a sod house is a lot of work. So yeah, you had a lot of people who just didn't have time for nonsense.
And these characters are all that way. They're funny in their own way, and I just have to say, I found myself laughing out loud the 3rd time I read it, just because of the use of words and the imagery and the stubbornness of Maddie, this 14-year-old girl. I'm going to get it done. I mean business.
Well, and she talks right at the very beginning. She talks Colonel Stonehill down on the horses. So I'm
Oh,
only going to
yeah.
pay this much. And in fact, you owe me money. I'm
She
not
knew-
paying, you owe me.
She knew
and she gets it.
exactly. And she buys little Blackie. She takes little
Mm-hmm.
Blackie, her first horse. He's a pony. And he goes on the trail with her and she rides him.
Yep.
And he does save a
Saves her life.
situation and he dies in the meantime. He's just worn out. And he was so good to her and she loved him. That's the first bit of sort of affection I saw from her.
Right. Until the very end of the book. And I think that's where you see some real affection shown for Rooster.
Yeah.
At one point, she tries to reconnect with him and finds out that he has died. Yeah, after he's gone on to have another, even more colorful life after.
Yeah.
Joined a Wild West show, and she was catching up with the Wild West show when it came nearby, found out that he had died in the last town that they had visited. But she actually had the body disinterred and brought to her family plot and buried
Yeah.
with her family.
He was probably the closest she'd ever been to someone.
Mm-hmm.
As crazy as he was, he did take care of her. She took care of him, and we're taking care of all these things here.
That's right. They made a great team.
And we're going to be right back. We've got to get these corn dodgers ready, check the pie, and we invite you to come to our Chuck Wagon dinner out here in, where are we going? Choctaw Nation?
Well, we'd be in Oklahoma.
We're going to Oklahoma. Join us. We'll see you soon. And in the meantime, let's take a look at today's menu so you can really do your own Chuck Wagon dinner.
Super easy.
Yes, it is. We'll be right back. Today, Doug Farmwald and I have been a part of One Book, One Michiana, and we love this program put on by the St. Joe County Public Library System. You like it too, don't you?
Well, I do. One, it's introduced me to a lot of new books I wouldn't have read otherwise. And I think it's really important because one of the main functions of a library, in my opinion, is building community. And the way to build a community has to have a foundation of a shared culture. And that's what all these books are.
Yes.
We may react to them differently. We might like some more than others, but we all have read the same thing. We have a place to start.
We have a place to start, and I'm sending this to my daughter in Denver because she has never read it. She's seen one of the movies, and I'd say if you can't read the book, see one of the movies. Because it's the same.
You'll get it.
You'll get it. Let's talk about what we've made. I have some fried apples, easily done on the trail here, and then I stewed some beef and added a can of corn, green beans, peas, some celery, onion, and even garlic. And what did you do?
I have our corn dodgers, which will go really, really well with stew, and some red bean pie.
Now, isn't that amazing? Red bean pie. I think that is just amazing. Well, you know, it would stay, it wouldn't spoil.
Right.
And you told me that sugar is a preservative.
In large quantities. So if you really sweeten something,
Yeah, it will stay.
it'll stay.
Ooh.
You're going to have to bring your plate over here.
I will. Well, I think your corn dodgers, your red bean pie, I can't wait to try it. And we are so glad you joined us today. And I just want to say I loved the book. I didn't think I would. I really enjoyed it. Look for the humor. Look for these different characters and where they're coming from. What did
Right.
you enjoy?
Well, and the characters really make the book. More than the plot. The plot
Yes.
is a Western trope. You're chasing the good guys chasing the bad guys.
Right.
Everything. But what really makes this is the characters of Rooster and LaBeef and Lucky Ned Pepper
And Maddie.
And Maddie.
Maddie, she is something. She's quite a girl, I have to
This
say.
is the story of her great adventure of her life.
And she wrote, and this is written as if she is 25 years older. She looks back on her life, and as you
Right.
said, this was probably the high point of her life.
Yep.
Yes, and after that, work, work, work. And thank you for joining us today. Remember, good food, good friends, good books, good Chuck Wagon food make for a very good life. We'll see you next time. And thank you, Doug.
Thanks for having me.
This WNIT local production has been made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Dinner and a Book is supported by the Rex and Alice A. Martin Foundation of Elkhart, celebrating the spirit of Alice Martin and her love of good food and good friends.